I'm Cindy, standing in the middle of the barn, surrounded by 200 shocked faces. I watched as the truth I'd painstakingly gathered over 18 months began to unfold. A man in a gray suit had just handed Harold, the man who'd taken me in after my family's death, a manila envelope. "You've been served," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Temporary restraining order from the county circuit court. No sale, transfer, or development of the farm is permitted pending investigation into probate fraud." The room erupted in whispers. Harold's face paled and Victoria, my so-called sister, shot to her feet, her wedding gown billowing around her. "What is this, Daddy? What is he talking about?" she shrieked. As I looked around at the chaos, my mind drifted back to 15 years ago. I was just a 7-year-old girl, living on a beautiful farm in the Virginia countryside. My parents, loving and hard-working, ran the farm with my grandparents, Henry and Nora. The farm sat on 120 acres of rolling green hills, with a red barn and white fence posts that my grandfather repainted every spring. Nora had hands that smelled like lavender and fresh soil. Every morning before breakfast, she'd take my hand and walk me along the fence line, pointing out the clover that the bees loved and the oaks that my great-grandfather had planted when he was 16. I didn't care about property lines or land value back then. All I cared about was the way the barn cats rubbed against my shins and how my grandfather let me steer the tractor on his lap. One evening, Nora placed a hand-carved oak trunk at the foot of my bed. "This is yours, sweetheart," she said, kissing my forehead. "Always." The trunk smelled like cedar and held a world of memories and secrets, but I didn't open it for 11 years. That fateful October, my parents drove to the city for a business meeting. They promised me ice cream when they got back. My grandfather sat on the porch reading his newspaper, and my grandmother hummed in the kitchen. The phone rang at 11 p.m. My grandfather answered it, and I heard the words that would shatter my world. A truck ran a red light. My world crumbled in that instant. My grandfather had a stroke a few weeks later, and my grandmother stopped humming and walking the fence line. She grew weaker and weaker, and in February, she passed away, leaving me alone in the farmhouse filled with grief. The funeral was attended by many in the county. Our neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a real estate developer with a slick smile, brought the biggest flower arrangement. His wife, Mrs. Thompson, stood beside him in a brand new dress. Mr. Thompson stepped up to the podium and said, "We can't let this child end up in the system." He placed his hand on my shoulder, and the cameras flashed. People clapped, and I was taken in by the Thompsons. But life with the Thompsons was far from what I'd expected. Their daughter, Lisa, who was 9 at the time, had a beautiful bedroom with a view of the valley, while I was given a small storage room at the end of the hall. The oak trunk for my grandmother was left in the corner, as Mr. Thompson thought it was worthless. From a young age, I was given chores on the farm. I was expected to muck stalls, drive the riding mower, and manage the livestock. Meanwhile, Lisa sat at the kitchen island, eating pancakes and going to riding lessons. "Mrs. Thompson would say, 'You're so independent,' as if my hunger and hard work were character traits. One night, I passed Mr. Thompson's study and heard him on the phone. "Guardian authority over the estate assets, and we manage everything until she's 18, he said, laughing. I didn't understand what estate assets were, but I knew that laugh. It was the laugh of a man who was taking advantage. As I grew older, the divide between Lisa and me became more and more apparent. Lisa drove a new car that her father bought for her, while I worked on the farm from dawn till dusk. I managed the farm's finances because I was good with numbers, but I never saw where the profits went. Mr. Thompson always collected the checks. I won an academic award at school, but no one from my family attended the ceremony. Lisa posted a family photo on social media, and I wasn't even in the frame. The caption read, "So grateful we could give our little adopted sister a home." On my 18th birthday, there was no cake, just an unsigned store-bought card. When I asked about college, Mr. Thompson said, "College isn't for everyone. We need you here. The farm doesn't run itself." That November, I finally opened the oak trunk. Inside, I found a bundle of family photos, a string of glass beads, and a sealed envelope with my grandmother's handwriting. It read, "Cindy, this land is yours. Henry and I made sure of it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The papers are with Mr. Johnson at Johnson and Associates." I drove to Mr. Johnson's office. He was an old-fashioned lawyer with a kind face. He showed me the trust agreement, an irrevocable trust that named me as the sole beneficiary of the entire farm. But he also showed me a deed transfer that had my grandmother's signature, dated after her death. I knew then that something was very wrong. Mr. Johnson said we needed forensic analysis, ink testing, and handwriting comparison. He warned me to keep it a secret. Over the next 18 months, I quietly gathered evidence. I sold produce at the local farmer's market, and the money I earned paid for Mr. Johnson's retainer. I also visited Mrs. Jenkins, my grandmother's closest friend. She told me that my grandmother had begged Mr. Thompson not to change anything, but he'd smiled and said, "Of course, Nora." 3 months later, the deed was in his name. Mrs. Jenkins signed an affidavit under oath. Then came Lisa's engagement. Her fiancé, Mr. Harris, was from a wealthy family that wanted to develop the farm into a resort. Mr. Thompson was overjoyed, talking about how this partnership would change everything. 12 days before the wedding, Mr. Johnson called. The forensic results were in. The signature on the deed transfer was forged. The ink compound wasn't commercially available until after my grandmother's death. We now had 4 pieces of evidence: the original trust, the forged deed with forensic confirmation, Mrs. Jenkins' affidavit, and 15 years of financial records showing that Mr. Thompson had withdrawn $487,000 from the trust account. I filed a probate challenge, and the judge signed a temporary restraining order. The day before the wedding, I received a rehearsal dinner invitation. My name was written in pencil at the bottom, as if I were an afterthought. At the rehearsal dinner, the dining room was filled with luxury. Imported flowers, a string quartet, and 60 place settings with gold calligraphy. But there was no place for me. Lisa smirked from her elevated chair and said, "We only reserved seats for important guests." Mr. Thompson waved me off, telling me not to make a scene. I excused myself and walked to the parking lot. I called Mr. Johnson and told him to move the service to the wedding. I knew that the next day, in front of all these people, the truth would finally come out. Back in the present, as the chaos in the barn continued, Mr. Johnson stood up and addressed the crowd. "Good afternoon. My name is Mr. Johnson, estate attorney. I represent the legal beneficiary of the family's irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary is Cindy." All eyes turned to me. Mr. Thompson's face was a mask of shock and fear. Mr. Johnson laid out the documents one by one: the original trust agreement, the forged deed, the forensic report, and the financial summary. Mrs. Thompson let out a gasp, and Lisa's mascara began to run. "What trust?"
"There's no trust," she cried.
But the evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Jenkins stood up and told the story of how my grandmother had tried to protect me. Nora told me she'd placed the farm in a trust for Cindy. Mr. Thompson came to her when she was bedridden and tried to get her to sign papers.
"She refused," she said.
The room was filled with murmurs. Some guests began to clap, a quiet, deliberate applause of recognition. Lisa broke down, shouting, "You think you can just take everything from me on my day? I gave you a home." I looked at her and said, "You gave me a storage room and a life of hard work. This land is mine, and I've waited 15 years for the truth." Mr. Harris removed his wedding band and said, "My family's lawyers need to speak with you, Lisa." Guests began to leave, some in shock, some in disgust. The Thompson family's world was falling apart. After the wedding, I went back to the Thompson house to collect my things. Mrs. Thompson tried to talk to me, saying, "We loved you, but Harold made mistakes." I looked at her and said, "You watched me work in that storage room for 15 years and called it love."
Mr.
Thompson also tried to talk to me, suggesting we split the property. But I told him, the trust is non-negotiable. The farm is mine. A week later, Mr. Thompson hired a big-name law firm to file a counter-claim, alleging that I'd manipulated Mrs. Jenkins and questioning my grandmother's mental capacity. But Mr. Johnson was prepared. He had the records to prove that my grandmother was of sound mind when she created the trust. The case went to court. Half of the town showed up to watch. Mr. Johnson presented the evidence, and the judge, after reviewing the documents, voided the deed transfer and reinstated the trust. She also referred the forgery evidence to the Commonwealth Attorney for criminal review. 2 months later, Mr. Thompson pleaded guilty to 1 count of misdemeanor fraud. He was given 2 years of probation, ordered to pay restitution of $487,000 plus accrued interest, and was permanently prohibited from managing any fiduciary assets. The Thompson Foundation, which Mr. Thompson had used to climb the social ladder, dissolved. His business partners stopped working with him, and he had to put his house on the market. Lisa lost her job at a PR firm. She called me once, saying, "You ruined my life." I told her, "I worked your farm for 15 years. Your life just became real." Mrs. Thompson wrote me a letter, confessing her complicity. She said she'd been wrong and that she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her. I called Mr. Johnson to ask if her cooperation as a witness would help the case, and he said it would significantly. 6 months after the ruling, I used the restitution money to improve the farm. I replaced the barn roof, rebuilt the fence, and bought a new tractor. I started a farm to table market, and it became very popular. I also enrolled in an online agricultural business program. A year passed, and I received an invitation from Mrs. Thompson for coffee. I decided to go. She looked different, older, and more humble. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, just wanted me to know that she saw me now. I told her that we weren't family, but maybe we could be something someday. As I sat on the porch of my farmhouse that evening, with the oak trunk open beside me, I wrote a letter to my grandmother. "Dear Grandma, I found your letter. The truth is out, and the farm is mine. I'm doing well, and I know you're smiling somewhere." I folded the letter and placed it in the trunk, next to my grandmother's letter. The land, which had waited for me for 15 years, now remembered me. And I knew that no forged signature, no missing seat, and number 15 years of silence could change that.